She defines status as widely shared cultural beliefs, and that will be pretty much the definition we'll use, although we'll be more precise on it. They are often attached to classes or types of people. And by types of people, we mean almost any sort of category, any social category can have status beliefs attached to it. Anytime you have any status beliefs attached to a group, what you're doing is you're ranking them in terms of what people think about the esteem that they are entitled to, the respect they're entitled to, and how much competence they have. And that's a pretty good informal definition of what status is. Towards the end of today's meeting, we'll have a formal definition of it, but the idea there is these are just beliefs that are attached to groups of people, to classes, to categories, about esteem and competence, how well they can do things. They operate in a wide range of social contexts. They're specific to a situation. They're usually specific to particular actors. That is, when status affects things, it affects it through interaction processes of specific people. So when you say there's a status difference in our society associated with gender, there's advantages to being male and disadvantages to being female, those are enacted when you have women and men working together. I mean, when they're just beliefs, they don't really have anything to do with anything. But they get enacted when people are interacting, when people are together. They're social definitions. They may be independent of evidence. So what we're concerned with here is cultural beliefs, which may or may not be supported by evidence. We don't really care whether they're true. What we care about is that people believe them. And they're resilient, they're persistent, and therefore they help perpetuate social structures. Because of the beliefs, they help perpetuate inequalities in society. Why do the beliefs matter? Well, she points out that inequality that's based on resources, like money or power, tends to be unstable. If you have an inequality structure that's based on power, by and large, at some point, people who are subject to the power are going to rebel and take power away from the guys who have it. Same thing is true with money, resources. I mean, you can have revolutions that will redistribute money. You can have laws that will redistribute it. So inequality in a society that's based on those two things alone is likely to be unstable at some point. Inequality that's based on status beliefs is going to be stable as long as those beliefs persist. So as long as people have the beliefs about differential esteem and competence associated with groups of people, then the inequality that's based on those beliefs is likely to persist. Once a status inequality exists, it tends to generate material inequalities. That is, it generates inequalities of power and money, wealth. So it's actually a very important mechanism in creating and recreating inequalities in society. It's a training mechanism. Training mechanism is the self-other expectations that get attached to people and the behaviors that are governed by those expectations. So if you focus on how status inequalities get created and how they're maintained, that'll separate differences from resources and power, emphasize that status is an independent causal force, and it'll show the links between beliefs and material inequality. That was what she wanted to conclude in the paper. The beliefs are powerful, they're independent, and they perpetuate structural inequality. Notice that this is the first time we have considered the inequalities in society. And we can do that now because we're talking about status differences. Up until now, we've been talking about interpersonal inequalities in the groups, for instance. But the status beliefs exist in a society, and they tend to produce the same sorts of inequality that we saw in small groups. Status beliefs as I said, include ideas about competence, how well people in that group can do things, agency, that is, how likely they are to take charge and have control over their own lives, and worthiness, social worthiness. That's what status beliefs really are. How worthwhile are people of that category? And the interesting thing about it is the person does not need personally to endorse the status beliefs. They're going to have an effect as long as somebody believes that most people share those beliefs. So I don't have to have a status belief about members of a particular group for it to affect my interaction with them. Rather, as long as I know that most people have those beliefs, then I expect this is how the people I interact with are going to interact, and I adjust to that. What do status beliefs do? Well, they shape judgments and behavior just like expectations do. They govern preferences for association. I would like to associate with people of this sort, not with people of that sort. They affect the responses to challenges. If somebody has a status disadvantage and doesn't act like it, that's called a status challenge, and people respond to that. All of these are boundary maintaining operations. If you think about status beliefs affecting judgments, which will then affect behavior, the way they work is if the status belief becomes salient, it biases the expectations that are attached to the individual. And those expectations have more and more effect as they become more and more related to the goals of the group. So one of the widely held beliefs among the widely held beliefs associated with gender in our group in our culture is that women are not very good at mathematics. Well, so you would expect then gender is going to have a big effect on engineering because it's a very math-intensive field. If you want to see the effects of status beliefs associated with gender, you might very well see a big effect in engineering. You might see a smaller effect in areas where the beliefs are not closely related to the group. Self-fulfilling effects on behavior. Just like with expectations, we don't usually recognize what's going on. We simply interact. And the differences tend to legitimate the inequality just because that's the way we act. Challenges, you almost always get hostility when there's challenges. Challenges mean somebody who's got a status disadvantage doesn't act like he or she has a disadvantage. And if that happens, what you're going to see is, very likely to see, is that other people will do something to suppress the inappropriate behavior. If women act assertively, for instance, status beliefs are women should not be assertive. You find an assertive woman, you'll find people acting to try to control her. Show her it's inappropriate, not let her be assertive, use unpleasant names for her, things like that. And the reason is these challenges are a threat to the status hierarchy. People believe in the status hierarchy because they share these status beliefs. And if somebody acts like he or she doesn't share them, that's a threat to the hierarchy. And by and large, people will take steps to try to suppress that threat. Somebody's getting above himself, social movement is too extreme. Lots of processes that tend to maintain the status inequalities. Presumably, here, if you know how it works, you know how you could intervene to affect it, just like with expectations.